If you're watching this on YouTube right now, you might be wondering why my tongue is blue. It's definitely not because I've been sucking on blue lollipops. It's because I am supporting my mitochondria. Mitochondria is a huge buzzword in health right now, and with good reason. Our mitochondria are so essential to optimal health, and in today's episode, we're going to learn what impacts our mitochondria and how we can help support them. My guest today is Dr. Scott Sherr. I'm going to read his bio. He is a board-certified internal medicine physician, certified to practice health optimization medicine, or home, and a specialist in hyperbaric oxygen therapy. Dr. Scott is the COO of Smarter, Not Harder, the company behind Troscriptions, a line of precision-dosed buccal troches, like the one I have in my mouth, turning my mouth blue right now, that are democratizing enlightenment by addressing the bottlenecks along the path to optimal health. Dr. Scott is a wealth of knowledge, and he has such a beautiful way of explaining complex topics and making them really easy to understand. He also gives us loads of actionable information and ways that we can start implementing strategies to help support our mitochondria today. I want to thank Dr. Scott for giving my listeners a discount on Troscriptions products, so you can use the code DannyHealth to save if you want to try any of these products we talk about in the show. My personal favorite is Blue Cannatine. You're going to hear me tell a story about how this supplement seriously changed my life. I am obsessed with it, and I hope that you love this interview with Dr. Scott. Dr. Scott, I'm so excited to welcome you to the Unlock the Sugar Shackles podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Thanks for having me, Danny. It's good to see you.
Yeah. I came across your products from multiple friends of mine because I hang out with lots of biohackers and health-oriented people, and it was only recently that I got exposed to Methylene Blue. I saw people at conferences with blue tongues, and I was like, "Are people eating blue lollipops here?" It's very not. I don't think that's what it is. So I started learning about Methylene Blue, and I tried it myself, and I tried Blue Cannatine, which is, it's something we'll talk about later. It's just got a little bit of extra stuff in there. But so my experience, my first time taking it, I actually sent out an email just the other day sharing this experience. I was over in your neck of the woods in Boulder, Colorado, and I had been to the Dragonfly conference. We were at altitude. I was speaking, all the travel. I was so tired when I came back. And I was like, how am I going to work today? And so I happened to have some Blue Cannatine. I popped it in my mouth, and I had it between, in my cheek. And by the time it dissolved, it was almost as if the only way I can describe it is that it dissolved all of the tiredness, all of the travel from my body. It felt like I got 8 hours of sleep. And that I wasn't traveling. Like, it wasn't like caffeine where it makes you like on fast forward. It was just like, oh, my body forgot all the tiredness it had been through. So it was such a cool experience because I had never found something like that where my brain was on. I was able to, record podcasts and videos and create content and, coach people. You don't normally have that. You don't come by a substance that makes you feel that good. So I was super excited. I really wanted to get you on the podcast. So happy to have you here. And I'd love to hear your experience with, how you got to where you are today and how you got interested in Methylene Blue, mitochondria, metabolism, all that good stuff.
Yeah, it's a great story, Danny. I think it's really instructive because so the formulator of Blue Cannatine, which is the product that you tried, his name is Dr. Ted Achacoso. And Dr. Ted is a mad scientist, brilliant biochemist, formulator, anti-aging doctor. He's written books, a lot of different things. And he actually formulated Blue Cannatine for himself when he was traveling, and he was doing, before the pandemic, he used to travel every 30 days every quarter to Manila where he has a practice, and he needed to get off an airplane and be ready right away. He couldn't wait and deal with jet lag for 2 weeks. He had to be ready to take the meetings, see his patients. And so Blue Cannatine was formulated in the context of trying to be ready right now focus right now, productivity right now, without having to wait. And because sometimes you just don't have the option of not having jet lag or getting the sleep that you want, or not having the stress that you have, or not having the baby cry at 2 o'clock in the morning, whatever it might be. So it's nice to have something and it works. And that's the nice thing about it. Once you find your dose, there's no question you've found your dose and you can rock it. So that's what I love Blue Cannatine for. But the bigger context really is that these products that we developed at Troscriptions come from our understanding of health from a larger context. We have a nonprofit organization called Health Optimization Medicine and Practice. And the nonprofit it's a 7-module certification course right now with a couple of advanced practice modules for doctors and practitioners looking to optimize health rather than treat disease specifically. And this is a framework that's very different actually from what most of us understand from even functional medicine. And I'm a big fan of functional medicine. I have a lot of friends who are functional medicine doctors. But what functional medicine really is doing is looking for root causes of illness. And what they're really not focused on as much is the root causes of health. And there's lots of standards of care for diseases. We all know this for blood pressure and diabetes and things like that, but there really is no standard of care for health. And so what Ted was able to develop was a framework that really encompassed what health could look like. And we think of health in a larger context and understanding various types of sciences that really aren't taught in medical school or even any other professional school, looking at cellular health and gut health and neurotransmitters and hormones but these are things that everybody's heard of before. But what's the difference here is that we're not focused on your symptom or your condition. We're focused on optimizing health and optimizing the cellular ecosystem itself, your gut ecosystem, your brain ecosystem, so that it's all working well. Because if it's all working well, then everything else is going to improve as well. So we like to say that the beneficial side effects of optimizing your health is that a lot of those other things are likely going to get better too. Now, the deal here, though, is that optimizing your health takes a long period of time. It's not like if you took 45 years to get to where you are now that you can expect in 2 days or 2 weeks or even 2 months that you're going to be where you want to be. And I think this is very much resonating with you and your audience that are listening. It's not like you can just stop and things are going to get better the next day. It takes time. So we all need things along that path to help us feel better right now while we're doing the harder work of changing our diet and our lifestyle and our exercise and our relationships and our movement patterns and everything else that goes along with that. And then, in the health optimization world, health optimization medicine world, the focus on data is also really important too. So you're looking at that data and you're modifying that data over time. So metrics of metabolism, et cetera. So Troscriptions was developed as a way to help people right now along the path of optimizing their health, to help with their focus right now, help with their mitochondrial function right now, help with their anxiety and their anxiousness and their stress now, and their sleep, and then more along the way. So that's the basic premise of how we've come along and gotten to where we are with your experience.
Yeah, I love that way of looking at things. I just finished the book Brain Energy by Chris Palmer. So now I'm just like very obsessed with mitochondria, metabolism.
Sure.
And this obviously blood sugar really fits into that. But just this concept of when we really, you talked about how functional medicine, they're trying to get to the root cause of disease, but that idea of what's the root cause of health? And it's making sure that our mitochondria and our metabolism are functioning well. So can you kind of unravel a little bit for someone who's maybe like, I don't really know what mitochondria and metabolism are.
Sure.
Can you talk about those things in an easy to understand way that helps us understand why these things are so foundational and so important?
Yeah, I've heard Chris Palmer's book is great. I haven't read it, but I know a lot of his work. And he comes from a very interesting background in his beginnings and everything too. So I highly recommend people check out his work. But the idea is that the mitochondria are these little parts of our cells called an organelle. It's a small part of our cell. Probably came from an old bacteria many, many millions of years ago. And what the mitochondria do is they help us make energy. Without mitochondria, we can make very little energy. And there's no way we could become as huge as we are in multicellular organisms without having mitochondria to help power our cells. So if you go back to like 7th grade, my daughter's actually in 7th grade now, and she just learned about cellular respiration. So This is probably when most of you learned about cellular respiration as well. From plants, it's photosynthesis, right? And then for animals, it's mitochondria here. We can make energy using our mitochondria. And so what we're talking about when we're talking about energy, we're talking about something called ATP. ATP is our energy currency, and our mitochondria are set up to help us make energy. And we have a lot of these. Some of our cells have actually zero. There's only one type of cell in our body that does not have mitochondria, and that is our our red blood cells. Our red blood cells have no mitochondria at all, but the rest of our cells do have mitochondria. You'll find the most in your heart, in your brain, your liver, your muscle tissues, and for females, actually the most per cell is in your ovaries. Yep. Your ovaries have a huge number of mitochondria. And the problem is that most of us are under mitochondrial stress, about 95% of the population. So the way we can extrapolate this is that about 6% of the US population is what we call metabolically healthy, which means that their mitochondria are working well and they're pretty well optimized. The rest of us, the rest of the 95%, do not have well-functioning mitochondria. And this doesn't mean they're not working at all. It's a spectrum, of course. Some people have very mildly dysfunctional mitochondria, and some people have very significantly dysfunctional mitochondria. So under that whole spectrum, we have a significant amount of work that most of us need to do, unfortunately. And then what disturbs our mitochondrial function? One of the most common things, actually, is insulin resistance. So that's the number one thing that actually is disturbing and just making our mitochondria dysfunctional is insulin resistance. And so that's a huge swath of our population overall. So in essence, our mitochondria are there to help us make energy. And unfortunately, because they make energy, they also have a lot of risk to cause stress in the system, because when you make energy in the system, you also make what are called waste products in the system. And what mitochondria do is they make the most waste products of any part of our cell, actually. So we have to be able to balance those out too. And if we don't have working mitochondria, we don't feel good. If our brain isn't working well, we have brain fog. If our heart's not working well, we're going to get cardiac issues. If our ovaries aren't working well, we're not going to be able to have a child. And this is one of the many reasons, including sperm are very highly metabolic too and have lots of mitochondria. This is why, one of the many reasons, it probably the sort of overarching reason why fertility rates are going down is because of mitochondrial dysfunction.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And so we can see that not only do, I think that sometimes we think like, oh, it's how we make energy. Like, oh, I feel energized, or maybe I need coffee, right? That's not the only type of energy we're talking about. You talked about these individual organs getting the nutrients, getting the energy that they need so they can function properly too. Like they need energy to function properly. So your liver needs the energy and the nutrients to do all the detoxification processes and, regulate our blood sugar and all those things. So if you can now start to see why, if the mitochondria is struggling, if there's dysfunction there, or there's too many of these reactive oxygen species, this like off-gassing that the mitochondria are making, and we don't have enough antioxidants, and maybe we could get into that, like how do we reduce some of the combustion from these mitochondrial reactions. But you can see why it is affecting us systemically. And you talked about insulin resistance being at the root of this. It's how insulin resistance is when our cells are struggling to get energy because they can't get the glucose where it needs to go. It's like the insulin's not doing its job of unlocking the cells, and basically, to put it in a simple term. And so we see, like, a lot of people are like confused about what are symptoms of blood sugar issues, what are symptoms of insulin resistance, what are symptoms of mitochondrial issues. It's going to look different for everybody because it's going to impact us in all these different areas. And that's why it's also hard to connect. It's not very obvious. It's not located to one part of the body. And so I always talk about, like, do you want everything in your body to work better, then, work on your blood sugar, because that's going to improve your insulin, and that's going to improve your mitochondria. So it's that effect. And then that's where I kind of talk about, like, what's your flavor of insulin resistance? So mine was that I had PCOS, I had weight gain, I had skin issues, I was craving sweets all the time. But some other people might have brain fog, and they might not be able to put on weight, and then they have fatty liver, or they have tendonitis, or so everyone has these different presentations. So I guess, what are some things that will help mitochondria? So if we pull back, like help the
Mhm.
mitochondria function well, and then also help to mitigate some of the reactive oxygen species.
Sure. Yeah. So what reactive oxygen species are, so when you make energy, when you make ATP, you need something called oxygen. Most of us have heard about it, probably, and most of us
A
know
little
that we
bit.
need it. And so oxygen is what's called the final electron acceptor. So what that means is that oxygen has to bind to a part of your mitochondria to help you make energy. And so when it does that, you make energy, you make this ATP, but you also make carbon dioxide and water. We all remember that from maybe seventh grade. But we
Okay.
also make something called reactive oxygen species, which are these reactive molecules that have oxygen attached. Typically, it could be oxygen by itself, or it could be oxygen with a hydrogen. It doesn't really matter. But these are really important, actually. We need reactive oxygen species in a small amount because they're hugely important for signaling and feedback mechanisms and multiple other things like making your thyroid hormones, actually. You need reactive oxygen species, okay?
Oh,
Most people don't know that. So these are
oh,
really
yeah.
important. But if you have too many of them, then the system starts breaking down. And it starts breaking down because the body can't neutralize it fast enough to prevent inflammation from happening. And oftentimes, inflammation is going to happen if you have insulin resistance, for example. You're going to have more inflammation because you're going to have too many of these reactive oxygen species and your body can't compensate for them. So, when you think about mitochondrial function, and how you can optimize it. I mean, they're very basic things that most of us can do. Okay. But in my world, the way I typically think about this is in a two-pronged approach. I like to get data as much as possible. So, health optimization medicine, we look usually at something like organic acid testing, which is pretty common in functional medicine too, where you can look at urine analytes for mitochondrial function. You can see how well somebody's making energy. You can actually measure each of the steps along the way of the energy metabolism process. This is called the Krebs cycle for people who actually like names for things, or the citric acid cycle. And so when I was in medical school, I learned all of the intermediates, I learned all of the steps, I had to learn all that crap, but I just had to memorize it. Nobody told me that it would actually mean anything or that I would actually be using it in clinical practice, but we can actually use all these things and understand them in clinical practice to understand how well the body is compensating. So you can actually look at this data, look at all the various intermediates, look at all the steps and all the enzymes and say that you're missing antioxidants, you're missing B vitamins, you're missing things like glutathione, for example, which is an antioxidant, or other things, or you're heavy metal toxic that's causing disturbances in the system, or your insulin resistance. And you can actually measure all these things and see it. But even before you get there, there are some very easy things that anybody can do to optimize their mitochondrial function. The biggest one typically is actually working them. So actually getting exercise is really important. So exercise is really great because exercise, your mitochondria are, so you have a huge reserve of mitochondria in your muscles. And if you have exercise induced fatigue, this is often because you have mitochondrial dysfunction. So if you can exercise typically is going to improve mitochondrial function. If you can become more parasympathetic, if you can relax more. The problem with being stressed all the time is that our hormones that are related to stress also can disturb mitochondrial function. And one of the reasons it can do this is actually because of elevated blood sugar that happens when you're stressed all the time, which I'm sure you know, Danny. So,
Hmm.
so I think of exercise, I think of being parasympathetic, I think of sunlight, I think of optimizing your sunlight is really important because that's also going to optimize mitochondrial function. Optimizing your sleep is really important too because sleep is where you actually can detoxify. Where we actually make the most melatonin is actually in our mitochondria because melatonin is a fantastic antioxidant. And so you need to have a good enough sleep to be able to recycle and to recalibrate and revitalize your mitochondria too. So these are the major ways that I think about it. I think about it from a dietary perspective as well. Of course, if you're eating inflammatory types of food, if you're eating things that are processed or things that are going to muck up the system too in various ways, you're going to have more inflammation in the system as well. So diet, lifestyle, of course, and then looking at data along the way is really important.
Yeah, that's all great information. And I love these tips and how a lot of things come back to okay, we need to move our body, we need to get outside, we need to eat healthy foods, we need to optimize our blood sugar. All of these things keep coming back for like every expert you talk to. It's like why are these things keep coming up over and over again for a reason because they're targeting so many things, but maybe the main one, the deepest root cause of all of them is that it's helpful for our mitochondria. So
Mhm. Yes.
I actually got an organic acids test about probably about 2 years ago at this point, and I my glutathione levels were zero. Zero.
Zero.
So,
That's
yeah.
impressive.
Yeah.
I
So,
haven't seen zero before.
yeah, so I was like, what is going on here? So I did a couple of things to improve that. I started taking N-acetylcysteine, and I also
Mhm.
started doing a lot of coffee enemas because that supposedly increases your glutathione by like 600%. So I was like, okay, I need to do all these
Yeah.
things. But what are some other ways we can increase these antioxidants? So glutathione's our master antioxidant, and I had none of it. So what are some good
Yeah.
sources of antioxidants, or how can we bump these up in our body?
Yeah, so the reason why we need antioxidants is that we were talking about these free radicals or reactive oxygen species. So you have to have the ability to neutralize or to basically balance out the oxidative load that's happening because of energy metabolism. So one thing I didn't mention is that not all oxidation is bad. So hormetic stress, like exercise, for example, causes increased oxidation, but that's okay because your body should have a natural response in about 2 to 3 hours, and that's called hormetic stress. This is high heat saunas, this is exercise, etc., things that are causing stress on the system, which can be good. But in essence, I think about this all the time. You have to have that ability to have that reactive antioxidant capacity, because if you don't, this is the person that does like a walk or goes into a sauna and then can't move for 3 days. And these are patients that I've worked with over the years, and then maybe you were in this camp too, Danny, where you'd do something to try to help yourself, but then you'd feel like you couldn't move for 3 or 4 or 5 days later. And this is often because there is no ability to create that reactive antioxidant response. So when you talk about creating that, the best way to do it really is to measure what you need. It's really hard to just supplement with antioxidants in general, because the problem is that many antioxidants, if you take them in too high quantities, can actually be the reverse. They can cause stress on the system. So a common one for this is CoQ10, for example. CoQ10 is great, but if you take too much of it, it's actually going to have the opposite effect. Vitamin E is the same thing. Vitamin E is also, especially if you take too much vitamin E, and there's been studies on this before, like they've actually in popular press, if you take vitamin E, you have a higher rate of causing cancer or something like that. I can't remember the exact study, but something like that.
Yeah.
And the reason why is because you're just supplementing with one antioxidant in very high amounts. So the key with health optimization medicine and practice, or home hope for short, is what I'll call it from now on. We call it home hope just to make it easier. It's a mouthful. The key with home hope is that we're not just looking at balancing one antioxidant, right? The idea is that you're balancing the whole network of antioxidants. So you're looking at your vitamin C and your vitamin D and your vitamin E, A, K, all your fat solubles. You're also looking at your glutathione, of course, and your CoQ10. And then if you're balancing all of those together, you're going to be in a much better place to being able to truly optimize your system rather than causing a imbalance by just supplementing with one.
Just
Now,
one.
in some cases like yours, like when you have a very, very low amount of something like glutathione, sure, you're going to be able to want to focus on that specifically, but you're not going to want to forget the other ones as well. Even with just supplementing with glutathione, you got to be careful there. So I'm glad you were using N-acetylcysteine. NAC is usually what I will use in practice, because NAC is something that supports glutathione production. But if you take glutathione directly in too high quantities, you're actually going to prevent your body, hypothetically, from making it when it needs it. So there's the other reason. Now, can you get antioxidants from food? Absolutely. If you're doing a great job getting your cruciferous vegetables and doing lots of wide variety of plants, you can certainly do that. I mean, I know there's arguments that some people don't like plants anymore. That's all about being a carnivore. But in my sense, these are actually great for vitamins, minerals, and nutrients. They have some anti-nutrients in them too, but that's part of the hormetic stress piece of actually creating the antioxidants and creating your need for them. So there's some help there, I think. Unless you're super sick and you need to go carnivore for the month of January or something like that, there are reasons to do these things too, okay? So I do think that you can get natural antioxidants from plants. There's also lots of vitamins and minerals, and obviously in meat as well, and meat and fish. And so it's nice to have a good variety of those. But in essence, it's what I found, honestly, it's really hard to get all of your nutrition these days from food, unless you're doing a lot of organ meats all the time, and not everybody wants to do that. Most of us need to supplement is what it comes down to, because it's just really hard to get that kind of bioavailability in the food that we're eating, even the meat that we're eating now compared to 50 years ago.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with everything you just said with that, some people are very gung-ho carnivore, but I think that it's more of a temporary therapeutic protocol for some
Right.
people. And, there are going to be those cases of people who need to continue doing it. But I often think that I would say that the goal for maybe most people is to be able to tolerate the highest number of different foods and getting the most diversity possible. And that idea that we shouldn't always, like, if your gut is healthy and robust and vibrant, I truly feel that you should be able to tolerate plant foods and have tolerate those little stressors from the anti-nutrients, and that they don't take you down. If they're taking you down,
Right.
then that's where you need to maybe use that elimination protocol or something
Right.
like that. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah, and
So,
just to kind of add on to that, I
sure.
think that's the key with home hope in general and our philosophy is that we're looking at building resilient people. And building resilient people means that they can have things that are making them go off the wagon every once in a while and it doesn't crush them for
Yeah.
weeks, right? Because you have the capacity to create a response, to balance out the anti-nutrients, to do everything that you just said. What was interesting for me and for us as a company, though, as we were looking at Troscriptions, is that Methylene Blue has got one of these fantastic profiles that has the capacity to both increase the energy that you make in your mitochondria, but at the same time also helps build your antioxidant reserve. And there's very few other compounds that can do that. And
Wow.
that's what got us so interested in it in the first place, because we knew that many people needed support making energy. But if you just give people support giving them more energy, it doesn't typically go well if they're pretty sick because they don't have the capacity to deal with all that energy that they're just making all of a sudden. And so, but if you just give antioxidants, you're not helping them with energy. So it's kind of like, well, if you could do both with the same compound and something that was almost self-regulating in the way it worked and how it worked in the system, then this could be a fantastic way of truly helping optimize people, no matter where they were on that health journey, if they were just starting or if they were really well optimized and just looking for an endurance edge. Because that's the interesting thing about the methylene blue that we use is that we have it in various kinds of combinations, as you know, and various single ingredient formulas as well, to truly see that spectrum of health and be beneficial in that capacity, in those capacities.
Yeah, so let's talk a little bit more about methylene blue in general. I also want to just make sure we pin. There was something that you mentioned earlier that I wanted to talk about. So you said that when someone does, if they do exercise and they're like taken out by it, or they do a sauna and they're like totally, crashed afterwards, I see people constantly with this and their blood sugar is crashing. And so
True.
these are people who are feeling like they are having reactive hypoglycemia. Some of them, their blood sugar isn't actually dropping that low, but it's low for them. So it's almost like their thermostat has been dialed up. And often I believe that this is due to insulin resistance, but I know that there's mitochondrial dysfunction at the root of this. And so what we do is we try to reduce stressors because they can't tolerate any of those stressors. They're not hormetic for these people. They go into
No.
this eustress, like distress place. And I had a client saying like, do you have any tips for taking a shower? I can't walk to the mailbox to go get my mail because I have to send my husband to do it because my blood sugar will crash. So these are the people who are just really, really struggling. Before we jump into methylene blue, do you have any insights on anything that might be supportive or anything that you've seen in your population?
Yeah, so in my clinical practice, I've been an internal medicine doc now for over a decade, and I've worked in the hospital. I have my own integrative practice where I see patients, and overall, when people come in that sick, usually it's because they have significant amounts of detoxification that they just can't do. And blood sugar is a big part of this, right? Because they're often always in sympathetic dominance too, which means that their body's always in fight or flight. So what I typically will do is, I've known for a long time, Danny, and I'm sure you know this too, like if you just work on the physiology, it's not going to go that far if they're also not addressing the psychology of this. Because I often find that the fight or flight piece needs to be addressed first if you're going to get anything to move. And I've seen people that should have gotten better, over my years, and they just don't because they're not allowing themselves, or they just can't for whatever reason. And there's a lot of great reasons. It could be trauma, it could be divorce, it could be like so many different things, right? That can be really, really hard to manage for kids like me, anyway. So, but anyway, so these things are hard and we have a lot to deal with. And so if you cannot get them back over that threshold from a psychologic perspective, then there's very little we're going to be able to do from a physiologic perspective. And sometimes you can sort of lead with the physiology and say, okay, let's try a couple of things here. Let's give you supplements, a little bit of vitamins, a little bit of minerals. But at some point, you're going to have to worry about what's going on above, their neck. And we call it the supratentorial stuff in doctor world, right? So that's the big piece, honestly, is that if we're going to, the people that are that sick that they can't walk to the mailbox, that they get 3 days of just feeling terrible after, if it started off as a physiologic thing, it's also going to be a psychological thing, because those loops, they're there, and you have to address them. If you don't, you're not going to get better. And it's hard for people because they're just like, well, just make me feel better. Just give me something that's going to make me feel better. And I'm like, we can try, but if we don't address what's going on in those thought patterns of yours, it's unlikely that this is going to be sustainable. It's hard, but it really is a big piece of the whole thing.
Yeah, absolutely. I find the same thing that I have a lot of them. I want to help them out physiologically, so maybe just some minerals, gives their adrenals a little bit of, some substance so they could, not be crashing every so often, and, getting them to have some healthy fats, which a lot of people have been scared away from eating, and it buys them a little bit more time so they don't need to be eating all the time. However, I start to notice that, just like what you said, I start to look at my CGM and I start to get a reaction. So it's then driving the, oh my God, is my blood sugar going to be low? And it's this whole cycle. So I have been connecting with different people to be able to refer people to different modalities where they can work on this inner work, the nervous system stuff. So that is something that I'm glad you brought that up, because it is so intrinsic to what is happening, and we cannot take that piece out. We can't overlook that. We can't just supplement and eat and exercise our way out of nervous system dysfunction, unfortunately.
There's a small segment of people where if you start making them feel better, then they'll start getting the motivation to actually work on some of the more challenging things. And maybe not even a small. I think there's I think about a significant percentage of people, once you start making them feel a little bit better, but it doesn't go away. You still have to address those things. And I will refer all the time to my friends and colleagues that work on the psychological side. And I have some integrative psychiatrists that I work with, and some various places around the world in the US, and I can send them those locations. And the key, of course, is a lot of my integrative psychiatrists are not just doing talk therapy, right? They're actually doing vitamin, mineral, nutrients, and gut testing, because it all goes together, ladies and gentlemen, right? Yes. It's not like, if you're doing this, I think in a holistic way, that's what you're thinking about it in that context. But having that ability to focus on the psychology by somebody who specializes in that can be very, 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 very transformative.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for addressing that and adding your thoughts. So let's dive into methylene blue. So we already started talking about it a little bit. So what is methylene blue? How come it makes your tongue blue?
So methylene blue is a compound that is actually blue. It's a dye, and it was the first drug that was registered with the FDA back in around 1897.
The first one?
The first one, yeah. So it actually used to dye blue jeans blue, crazily enough. And somehow they figured out that if they used methylene blue against malaria, it killed malaria, but it did not kill human cells. And so that's why it was called a magic bullet. It was one of the first drugs that was considered a magic bullet, because it had this ability to kill non-human cells, but actually not have any major terrible effect on really any terrible effect at all on regular cells for the most part. So that's what a magic bullet was called, or that's why it was called that. And so for the first little while, methylene blue was the only antimicrobial available. It actually was the only thing available during World War II. There was no antibiotics during World War II. People don't realize that. But they were using methylene blue as an antifungal, as an antimicrobial in general. And so if you were in the Pacific Theater during World War II, you carried around methylene blue tablets while you were in the jungle over there to prevent certain types of infections. Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
That's wild.
And then antimicrobials came on the scene, so methylene blue wasn't as popular, because methylene blue, as you said, does dye things blue. So it'll dye your tongue blue, it'll dye your urine blue, and so your urine will be blue if you take methylene blue.
And gallstones. Very, very, fun fact. And gallstones, really? As noted from coffee enemas. So I'll just leave that. Yeah, it's super weird.
So I know very, very high doses of methylene blue will turn other secretions blue, but I wasn't aware of gallstones. Interesting.
Okay. Yeah.
Good. Interesting. Cool. All right.
Yeah. Yeah.
That
Learn
should be
something
put
every
in
day.
the back of my mind for use later. Thank you.
Yeah, sure.
So after the antimicrobials came around, methylene blue became out of favor, but it actually was what was interesting about it, it had an all new life as a number of different things. The first antipsychotic drug was derived from methylene blue. It's called chlorpromazine. And that's because methylene blue, not only does it have antimicrobial effects, it also has what's called monoamine oxidase effects. And that means that it prevents the breakdown of certain neurotransmitters in the brain, including serotonin, dopamine, norepinephrine, and a little bit of melatonin. So it was used directly as an antidepressant, but mostly as a derivative, and other drugs were derived from it. And then people like me learned about methylene blue because it stains your cells. And it's used as a stain in labs. And what does it stain in labs? It actually stains your mitochondria. And so over the last several decades, we now know that methylene blue concentrates in the mitochondria, because what it does there is it helps support mitochondrial function, as I was mentioning earlier. It helps support energy production. It supports antioxidant capacity, so you have more antioxidants on board. And so over the last many decades now, it's been studied in various types of injuries related to mitochondrial dysfunction. Strokes, traumatic brain injuries. It's been studied in trauma. It's been studied in infection again. And so it's coming back as another anti-infective as we're using, now that all these other bacteria, unfortunately, are resistant to many types of the therapies out there, including malaria, actually. The first type of, like I said, malaria was the first thing that it was treating. Now it's coming back to be treated again with methylene blue, because some of the drugs that we were using no longer are amenable to be treated with the drugs that we were typically using. So now it's now becoming an anti-infective again, and it's being used for mitochondrial optimization across that spectrum, across the spectrum of people that have severe mitochondrial stress, to people that have significant optimization already on board, and they're just looking for that extra edge, and all across the board. It just depends on kind of where you are, and the dosing depends as well, which we can talk about. But it's really something that could be supportive for a lot of people.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's so interesting to learn all about all its uses, and I've certainly experienced those, because now, as someone who's a podcaster, content creator, coach, all the things, running a business, I find that I have to be into things for performance, because you can't really take a sick day, or like I don't feel like it. Like, my brain has to be on all the time. And so I love having methylene blue in my toolbox because of how much brain clarity it gives me. And I know that so many people struggling with blood sugar issues, they experience brain fog, because it's their brain is not getting the energy that it needs. And so it can be really, really helpful, just as you said, where it's like we're working on all the root causes, but we're
Right.
also, we want to feel better right now too. And I would argue that if something's helping mitochondria, it is somewhat helping root causes as well. Is it? Would we say
Absolutely.
that?
Oh,
Yeah.
yeah. So, I mean, and one thing that's great about it is it's also helping regenerate mitochondria too. We know that methylene blue is actually improving mitochondrial function, and also regenerating the complexes on it that help you make it work. If you don't have good complexes, which are these little proteins that are on the mitochondria, you can't make energy well. So, and it also is decreasing the number of zombie cells or senescent cells in the body too, because it's regenerating the mitochondria. If you're regenerating mitochondria, you're helping the cells work better so they can actually function. What these zombie cells do in the body as we get older is that they don't divide, they don't really make a whole lot of stuff, they just cause inflammation. So if you can get rid of them, your body is going to be happier for it. So we're huge on regenerating mitochondria, optimizing mitochondrial function, using methylene blue as one of these major tools that you can use. But you said it perfectly, Danny. It's not just about taking methylene blue. It's about taking a huge holistic view of, okay, looking at insulin resistance, looking at optimizing mitochondrial markers, diet, lifestyle, exercise. It all comes back to those things. But do you need help right now? Do you need an edge right now? That's where methylene blue can help you. And now you have our stack, which is what you were taking earlier. You were talking about Blue Cannatine. Blue Cannatine is the stack of methylene blue, along with nicotine, caffeine, and CBD. And this stack was created, as I mentioned earlier, by Dr. Ted, because we wanted people not only to have the mitochondrial support, but also give you that mitochondrial edge, which is where you get the nicotine and caffeine in there. So people get scared about caffeine. No, they don't get scared about caffeine. They get scared about nicotine, of course. And nicotine is a fantastic mitochondrial optimizer. It actually works by enhancing energy production, and it also is known well to be a cognitive optimizer. It helps with memory, it helps with recall, it helps with verbal fluidity. But you don't want to smoke or vape nicotine. You don't want to have high doses of nicotine. But if you have very low doses, a cigarette or a vaping product has about 20 milligrams of nicotine in it. So a lot of nicotine. Our troches, which is the type of formula that we use at Troscriptions, have just 1 milligram in a full troche. And it's basically a microdose. And then most people that are taking our Blue Cannatine will take about a half of the dose, a half of the troche at a time. So you're getting about a half of a milligram of nicotine at that. So it's been studied in cognitive dysfunction. It's well tolerated. We know people that can chew gum, have nicotine patches, do fine for the rest of their life as long as they're not smoking. Okay, so people get worried about it, but it's a fantastic nootropic cognitive enhancer. So
Yeah.
I don't know if you'd had any worries about nicotine before you took it, did you, Dan?
I didn't actually because I had heard from a friend who got me turned on to this stuff called Lucy gum, and it has
Yes.
like small amounts of nicotine. And she talked about how there's a lot of studies looking at during COVID, they were worried about all the smokers because it was such a respiratory illness. But what they found was that there's a study showing, I don't know the exact one, I can't pull this up for you, but something about that the nicotine had this protective effect on smokers so they didn't go down as much as they thought that they would during
Right.
COVID. I don't know if you are familiar with this or
I'm familiar
could
with the study.
expand upon
Yes, I'm
it.
familiar with the study. Yeah, and it's interesting the way nicotine works as an anti-inflammatory on some level too, right? So, but it's not just the nicotine in your vaping and smoking products, ladies and gentlemen. It's also all the other things that are added to those products to make them more addictive, or the other ingredients, right? So this is a vaping product. It's your scents and your oils. If it's your cigarettes, it's all the other stuff that's in the plant that's been bred to make it more addictive and also has tons of carcinogens in it itself. So yeah, so nicotine's been studied not only in that capacity, but it's also being studied in the post-COVID, long COVID world. We've had a number of people with reports of significant improvements using nicotine in our products and others, using it as a result of how it works physiologically and helping the system recalibrate itself. So people getting their smell back after losing it for a couple years, just with taking nicotine or some products like it. Yeah, so pretty interesting stuff overall. So I think nicotine's great in low doses. It's very short acting in general. It's only about a 2 hours kind of thing. We also have caffeine in there that everybody knows. Caffeine's a pretty low dose in Blue Cannatine. It's only got, for a full troche, it's got 50 milligrams of caffeine, which is about a quarter cup of coffee. And if you take a half, you're taking 25. If you're like me, you take a quarter and you're good because you don't drink caffeine, then you're good to go. If you're a slow caffeine metabolizer, you may want to watch out after about 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon. But if you're not, you don't have any issues with this. And you get 3 to 5 hours of focus, productivity, just getting it done, really. And it's kind of a fantastic turn the light switch on feeling as you had when you came back from your trip to Boulder, Danny.
Yeah, it's and I will have you know, Scott, that I tried that. I did half of a troche when I did that, and I felt so good that I mean, I'm telling you, before it even finished dissolving, I went online and I bought another 3-pack because I'm like, I can't be without this. I feel like I found that magic bullet, just like you said. I was like, oh my goodness, I need this in my life. So I needed to make sure I had a lot on deck and on reserve because I'm very careful with those. I'm not very generous with them, with these because
Yeah.
I just love them so much. So let's talk about the other products that you guys have and how they are important for neurotransmitters.
So I think the segue here is that we were talking earlier about the threshold and about the sympathetic response and fight or flight. And so we know this as clinicians, and I know this, and I'm sure you do too, Danny, that if you're going to help people, you really have to get them out of that state as much as you can. So you want to work on all the other things that we described. You want to work on diet, lifestyle, getting them some psychological care if they need it. But compounds can help. But the challenge is that many people out there are taking things like benzodiazepines or the Z drugs or sleep drugs to help them go to sleep, or anxiety for the benzos, for example. These drugs are super addictive. They work very, very strongly on what's called the GABA receptor in the brain. And the GABA receptor and the GABA neurotransmitter receptor system is all about inhibiting or relaxing the brain's firing. And there's lots of ways to enhance the GABA system naturally. And we can do this by many things that we've talked about already. You can improve it by exercise, because you can improve the balance of the excitatory neurotransmitter that balances out GABA, or that's kind of always working together with it, called glutamate. Those two are always in the balance with each other. So exercise help, doing breath work, yoga, meditation, all these things that help with the parasympathetic response are also going to help. But many people need help right now, as we talked about. And so Troscriptions, we decided to develop a couple of products in the GABA space, let's call it, that we're creating, because we wanted to affect the GABA system in a holistic way that did not require some of those meds, for example. So we made something called Tro Calm. And Tro Calm is a combination of CBD and CBG, two non-psychoactive cannabinoids. And these are fantastic. CBD, everybody knows at this point. CBG is kind of a new and up and coming one. It's great for pain. It's great for temperature sensitivity, anxiety. It's some anti-cancer research. It's really interesting, actually. It's going to be really cool coming on the scene soon. Really excited about CBG. It's my favorite cannabinoid. It's non-psychoactive as well. And we also have in there something called kava. Many people have heard of kava these days. Kava also works on the GABA receptors. So I should mention that CBD and CBG also work on the GABA receptors, and as well as working on what's called the endocannabinoid system, which is our body's own system that kind of regulates balance or homeostasis, but also working on GABA. Then kava works on the GABA system. And we have something called nicotinol GABA in there. Nicotinol GABA is a vitamin B3 attached to a GABA molecule. And what's really unique about this is that if we take GABA supplements, they don't work most of the time. GABA is too big of a molecule by itself to get across something called the blood-brain barrier, which is this barrier between the rest of our body and the brain. So if you're taking GABA supplements and they're working for you, this could mean that you have a leaky brain. Also, just that means that you have a leaky gut. So don't get too worried. It just means that your blood-brain barrier is not doing what it's supposed to do to keep things out. And this could be one of the reasons why you have inflammation, why you have brain fog, why you have no energy. And so you need to fix the gut. This will typically fix the brain oftentimes. And so it's not, when I say leaky brain, I know people get scared, but you don't have to worry about it, because many people in this are walking around just like you, and just like I was previously too. And you have to optimize gut function, and you're going to be okay. But if you take GABA itself, that's why it doesn't typically work for most people. But if vitamin B3 attached to a GABA, this is called nicotinol GABA, this is going to get it through the blood-brain barrier because it has that vitamin B3 attached. And so now you have a little bit of vitamin B3 in the brain, which is mildly activating, actually, which is good because it doesn't make you feel tired. Most things that are working on anxiety and stress are going to make you feel tired. But the cool thing about our troches, which is the delivery device that we use at Troscriptions, they're these small dissolvable lozenges that come in a square. They go between your upper cheek and gum. Excellent. Nice. Yeah. I should always have them next to me.
Yes.
They go between your upper cheek and gum and dissolve. You can take a quarter, you can take a half, you can take a full. A quarter of Tro Calm is just going to take the edge off just a little bit. So instead of feeling like you're in fight or flight, you can't remember your words, you can't remember what you're going to talk about, your mind goes blank. It's like that nightmare that everybody has before they give a speech. That's because your brain is so sympathetically driven that you just forget what you're supposed to talk about. So if you just take the edge off just a little bit, that's going to help you be able to form your words, get your thoughts. You're going to actually function and optimize and actually work and optimize better. You're going to talk better. You're going to communicate better. You're going to do what you want, and you're going to be great at it, right? As opposed to not being able to think. So it's taking the edge off just a little bit to do that. Or you can take more to take the edge off even more if you need to. So people will take some additional Tro Calm in the evenings to help them wind down in the evening as they're kind of getting ready for the day to be over, and they're not wanting to drink wine, which is going to mess up their blood sugar and also going to mess up their sleep, for example. So Tro Calm is a great way to wind down. It also just takes down that chatter in your brain just a little bit too. So when we're anxious or we're stressed, we have 120,000 thoughts per day. On average, we have about 70,000 thoughts a day. So that's a huge number of thoughts just at baseline. But if you're anxious or you're stressed or you're depressed, you have about 120,000 thoughts per day. So if you can take down that level just to about to your baseline, maybe to around 70,000, it's going to be easier for you to wind down. It's going to be easier for you to get to bed in the evening when you're ready to go to bed, that kind of thing. So if your mind is a perseverating type, that you have those constant thoughts that are going before you go to bed, Tro Calm can be very helpful for that too.
Yeah, and I see it as what we talked about earlier, is that nervous system state where it's like, maybe you have a history of trauma, or there's, stuff going on and it's causing you to show up with poor mitochondrial function, blood sugar crashes, you can't tolerate exercise, all these things, this is an again amazing tool in the toolbox to help calm the system. And so I love that it can work for alerting us and being more stimulating with the methylene blue and the blue cannatine, but also to have that other end of the spectrum, that down regulation. Like, we need both of these things so badly. So that's awesome. And then you have one more, right? The sleep blend.
Yeah. So just to kind of put
Oh, sure.
one more thing on the Blue Cannatine and the Tro Calm, you can do both at the same time. So we have some people will use the Blue Cannatine for the stimulation, and the Calm just kind of have that calm focus. So sometimes I'll do that throughout the day if I'm kind of feeling like I'm a little bit overstimulated, and with the Blue Cannatine, I have a little bit of Calm just to kind of smoothen it out. So you can combine these things together. You can also use the Blue Cannatine in the morning and then the Just Blue in the afternoon, and kind of keep yourself rolling without having the caffeine underneath you. So Just Blue is our pure methylene blue troche that you can use. And we have a number of different ways and that we've kind of formulated these things and thoughts. We have a lot of blogs on this on our website. We have one on jet lag, for example, that talks a lot about using methylene blue to prevent jet lag. And we talked about that earlier with Blue Cannatine as well, so you can use them in combination. But Just Blue is your go-to for jet lag because it's going to prevent mitochondrial stress while you're at altitude on a plane, when you have low oxygen levels, getting more radiation because you're on an airplane closer to the sun, and et cetera. So I've had people check that out. And to finish off the GABA conversation, we have our Tro Zzz. And Tro Zzz is this comprehensive GABA formulation that we've designed. It's not just working on the GABA system, it's actually working on the serotonin system as well. It's got a little bit of 5-HTP in there, melatonin as well, so a little bit of melatonin. It also has a fantastic mushroom in there called cordycepin from the cordyceps mushroom that works with deep sleep, so slow wave sleep. And we have something called hynoconachile in there, which is from magnolia bark, which is working on the GABA system. We also have adenosine in there, which is working on preventing those people who like to have late coffee. If you have late coffee, what coffee does is prevent adenosine, this neurotransmitter, from binding to its receptor. And so what giving adenosine can do, it can help unbind that so you can actually get to bed even if you have some late coffee. I don't do that, but I used to when I was younger. So nice to have something that can help you fall asleep. So it's got a total of 8 ingredients, including CBD and CBN, which is another non-psychoactive cannabinoid that helps with sleep and modulation of the GABA system too. So the way we formulate, Danny, as I think you know, is that we're looking at very low doses of things in synergistic ways. So this is supporting the system. It's going to, Tro Zzz in this case, is going to support your sleep architecture. So it's instead of something like THC, which is going to ruin your deep sleep, or some of these Z drugs like Ambien and others, which completely they demolish your deep sleep actually. This is going to really help support your whole sleep architecture. And that's what we care about as clinicians. We're trying to help support the system entirely and not just give you something that's going to make you feel good for the moment. That doesn't give you the full spectrum overall.
Love that. I love that. And I feel like all these products are so thoughtfully designed, and they're so effective. And I've had multiple people say that the Tro Calm is their favorite supplement they've ever taken because of how relaxing it is. So thank you so much for sharing. I know that we have a hard stop, and I feel like we could talk for a while longer, but thank you so much for coming on and sharing all your knowledge, helping us better understand mitochondria, ways that we can support our body. And we'll link everything in the show notes, but just why don't you tell people where they can find you and what you're up to with your that home program that you talked about.
Sure. Danny, thanks for having me. This has been a pleasure. I know it took us a while. We both have 631 area codes, and we're both from Long Island. And we don't.
Yes.
I'm really impressed that you don't have an accent. I'm really
impressed that you don't have an accent. I was thinking about that.
So we did it. Yeah.
We can have one if you want it. No.
Yeah. Oh, I can throw it.
But I don't want to talk about your blood sugar. I don't want to talk like that on my podcast.
The last 30 seconds of the podcast, we got it. Yeah. Anyway, so if you want to learn more about our products, you can go to Troscriptions, Troscriptions.com, as well as Troscriptions on Instagram. It's the word troche and the word prescription mashed up into the word Troscriptions. So you can check it out there. Troches are cool. You can learn all about them on our website. And then if you're interested in our nonprofit, if you're a practitioner and you're looking for more training, want to look at how to optimize health, check out homehope.org. We're also at homehope.org on Instagram, I believe, as well. And we have a pretty pretty cool channel there. And yeah, we'd love to hear from all of you. Come on, check out our products. It'd be great to hear feedback. We always love understanding all the nuances, and I'm always on the customer service side talking to people that are interested in and like learning about all the cool ways that people are using things, like smell, for example. Earlier we get all these great reports of really cool things. So
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. I hope you have a great day.
thanks, Danny. Take care.